to truly flourish as image bearers of God, might that require us to give something up?
Well, it probably will.
Yeah.
Right?
And are we willing to? And again, I'm asking that of myself.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name is Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
For those of you new here, we are trying to create space to play around with a few ideas in the context of what it means to teach and lead Christianly. And one of our deep hopes is that you might be encouraged to go back to your classroom, your staff room, or hallway and engage in your own hallway conversations. We also love it when listeners give us feedback, suggest ideas for shows, or even send in questions. Please send your feedback to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. So Dave and Abby, we have been working through Andy Wolfe and Lynn Swaner's book, Flourishing Together, a Christian Vision for Students, Educators, and Schools. Mm-hmm. And last week we went through section 1. We're doing this for the next few weeks.
Yep.
And so this week we are focused on part 2, which is around relationships. So before we begin, my check-in question for today is, who's one teacher in your K-12 experience that you had a positive relationship with? Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, that person's coming to your mind in terms of positive relationship or an inclusive and safe culture in their classroom. Have somebody come to mind for you?
Yeah, well, I had the unique opportunity to teach with many of my former teachers. So I started, my first job was at my alma mater, high school, right? Yeah. So I had been there 5 years earlier as a student.
Wow.
And then got to teach with all of these people as well. And so that was an interesting experience. But I taught next door to Karen Christians, who I know listens every once in a while to the show. So if you're listening, Karen. Hi, Karen. And I would say I had her as a teacher as well, and she definitely embodies that very safe, very welcoming, very hospitable stance, and was like that as a colleague as well. So we taught next door to each other. She was also an English teacher, and I always think I really learned how to teach through swimming lessons and through my door being open during my prep period while Karen taught. Right? Yeah. She had a unique ability to connect with students, a unique ability. Okay. From all spectrums, from all kind of walks, no matter whether school was your thing or whether, you were a lot more interested in farming or sports or whatever, unique ability to connect, I would say.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I'm right away thinking of Ken Lodewijk. I was a high school volleyball coach. I loved sports. Sports was sort of my into education. I didn't love school. I was, for me, it was other things that kept me there, the people, the sports. And he was probably one of the first coaches I remember. He didn't come till literally my senior year of high school. That sort of really showed to me that you can have a high level of excellence and accountability, but also high support. Like, he pushed us, and I loved it. I thrived. I was like, this is amazing. Like, he demanded the best for us, and he held us accountable. But it wasn't always just, here's what you're doing wrong, but here's how we're going to fix it. Here's how I'm going to help you be a better player. Here's how I'm going to help you be a better person off the court. And he was very intense and very serious. But every once in a while, he seemed to know when to also let his guard down and show a playful side to himself. And he just created this culture of that demanded the best, that led to us wanting the best for ourselves, and not settling, so to speak. So, yeah, it's somebody that comes to my mind as I was thinking, as you were talking about Karen being able to relate to all people. I was thinking about Ken and just high support, high accountability.
Yeah.
How about you, Dave?
So I'm going to pick on Bob Slager. Was one of my junior high science teachers. I believe he was my 8th grade science teacher, and I would attribute the fact that I became a junior high science teacher to Bob Slager. He was the sort of teacher who's quirky, but in such a genuine and caring way. And his classroom was one where it was good to be smart. It is okay to be smart. And just that kind of affirmation. The middle school that I went to, we had like an exploratory program. And so I took several exploratory courses with him specifically because it was him. Like I had some choice in which ones I would take. And so I took a model rocketry class. I learned how to build and design my own model rockets with Bob Slager. And that was a formative experience for me. We took a class called Outdoor Adventures, and it was biking, camping, hiking, photography, like his loves. And like that was formative for me. And so we did a bike hike. You pedal 20 miles and camp out and take pictures while you're there. Like it was that kind of an experience, right? And these are all things I still love today. And I'm convinced it's because of that kind of, he was just such a relational guy.
That's awesome.
It matters.
It does matter. Those things matter, actually, right? And it's interesting to me as you said that, right? And in sort of our interactions, like how you set a culture of what is okay in your classroom, right? Whether it's around behavior or whether it's around academics, right? I had a student mention this morning, talking about a positive classroom culture, having a teacher in school that made it okay to be peculiar, to love different things, to like, and it was really the first time where she felt safe to love different music or different art or all those types of things. And so it's just a reminder, right? Is what you notice and give permission for around those passions is important. Dave and Abby, we are, as I mentioned earlier, we're in Swaner and Wolfe's book here about flourishing. And we're going to use a AAA protocol. So we all use protocols in our classroom, and this is one we've probably all used at one time or another. And so just for listeners, and we encourage you to use these protocols, but basically there's 3 rounds to the AAA protocol. It's round 1 is each person shares something that they agree with in the book or that resonated. Round 2 is that each person identifies one thing they want to argue with in the text. And then round 3 is each person identifies one thing they want to aspire to as a leader or as an educator. So in that context, Dave, maybe I can start with you.
Sure.
How about one thing that you agreed with in the text, and maybe if you want, you can cite the text or the page number, and maybe just talk about why that resonated.
So I'm on page 79, and this is the chapter called Abiding Together. I really love that word picture of abiding, right? So it's not just hanging out or passing each other, but like intentionally spending time together. And I'll just read a little bit of it here. Paradoxically, teaching and learning in schools can be lonely, regardless of the quantity of people in the buildings. Teachers often spend much of their day apart from their adult colleagues, often only touching base in the corridors. Leaders may rush from one meeting to the next, addressing action plans and deliverables, but rarely stopping just to be with one another. And I'll skip down a little bit here. If relationships are fundamental to flourishing, then each of us needs to take care to establish deliberate rhythms and routines with people we trust to guarantee we stay grounded. And that piece just I really want to agree with that. I think about my years teaching in K-12 schools. Like I would see colleagues in the hallway when we're standing in the hallway during passing times. We'd run into each other in the workroom, but it's often me coming while they're going, or our intentional time together was during lunch when we were sitting in the cafeteria with our students, but we would try to at least sit together for 7 or 8 minutes and be able to touch base at least how's it doing. And it's just really hard because people are so busy all the time, and just it is fascinating to me how often teachers are really lonely in their work. And I guess I'm characterizing that on my own experience, but many teachers that I've talked to, for a job where you're with people all the time, it's often really lonely work.
I agree. Yeah. You do have contact with other adults, but it is often in passing. And it actually kind of goes with what I was going to agree with.
Please.
So if we want to transition, where it talks about collective leadership. So it's talking about relationship among educators. They're talking about relationship among educators in the building, and calling for kind of leadership interdependence. I have the Kindle version of the book, so I don't know page numbers, so I apologize. But it's in the first chapter of this section. So we're looking at, chapter 4, Flourishing Relationships. Among educators, and it's talking about collaboration, specifically communities of practice among teachers was the thing that I really appreciated them talking about. For me, I actually was part of a professional development initiative that worked to establish communities of practice, and they talk about, they say, collaboration is a necessary condition for creating what Etienne Wenger, I think I said that right, describes as communities of practice, or groups of people who share a concern or passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact by developing a shared language, working toward common goals, and committing to supportive relationships with each other. So teachers can work together on improving student learning outcomes, right? Supporting students who have learning difficulties, inclusion, unpacking standards, mapping curriculum, designing lessons, constructing assessments that measure mastery.
Yes.
All of those things that are just easier to do when you have colleagues around you doing the work together. We would look at student work, we would look at our tasks and give each other constructive feedback around a protocol, and it was just such a vital part of my professional growth that I really appreciated. This idea of developing not just like you have 45 minutes in a room, but specific communities of practice where you're working toward a common goal and developing shared language, right?
With a longer term view.
Absolutely.
This isn't a one-off kind of
it's
thing.
not just plan for next week.
Right.
Although planning time is important.
Yep.
To collaborate together, but there are these communities of practice studying deeper issues and working toward bigger goals.
Yeah.
So if I think about the kind of classroom, right, that we want, where we want our learners to be interdependent together, I don't think that it's possible to create that if you are not plugged into and part of one yourself.
It makes me think about then the things that we hope for as school leaders. If we don't provide resources, time, just different, that we create a framework that allows that to happen in our scheduling. You know, it goes back to this. Now, this is related a bit to what I was going to talk about in terms of allowing students to do real work, real need, that for real people. And Nicholas Woltersdorf has this quote that we've cited before about it being a grossly unwarranted hope, kind of a pious wish that students upon graduation will shape and form culture if they are not given opportunity to practice that in school. Right. But it makes me think about that even around, hey, like what kind of culture do you want? If we don't allow our teachers to practice a certain culture with each other, if we don't have norms in a staff room, how can we expect that to translate? It becomes a grossly unwarranted hope as a school leader and a pious wish that faculty who don't learn together and build relationship and sharpen each other, that's actually those trusting relationships are magically going to happen in our classroom. Thanks for sharing that. My quote comes from page 64, and it just says, schools that engage the community help students understand what it means to love our neighbor, which has a lasting impact into adulthood. I mean, it just made me think about what is our deep hope for our students, and all of this in an rigorously academic context. But how are we ensuring that there's a connection between the head and the heart? That the things that we're learning, education as formation. I mean, of course we want our students to love our neighbor and to understand who their neighbor is. But again, it becomes this pious wish and this grossly warranted hope if they're never rubbing shoulders with their neighbor, if they literally don't know who their neighbor is. And it just made me realize, and this is not my question, I heard this from someone else, and you probably have heard this before too, right? But it's this idea of like, if your school shut their doors tomorrow and closed down forever, would your neighborhood miss you, or would there be great rejoicing in the land, right?
Right.
And it's something to think about, right? Is like how do our neighbors view us, and have we even asked them, like what is their perception of who we are? And I just think about my friend Daryl DeBoer, who works with Teaching for Transformation. He often uses the language of things being deeper in and further out. And I think when we do real work that meets a real need, to use Swaner and Wolfe's language of how do we get our students to move into our neighborhood, or our schools to move into our neighborhood, to be a faithful presence, that then our faith isn't, it goes deeper in, but it also goes further out. And I just love that idea of being involved in our neighborhood, of contributing to the common good. What that means for our neighborhood, what that means for our school, and what that means for our students, how they're all being formed.
Yeah.
In that. So that's the one thing that I really resonated. Now, Abby, is there something in your reading that you wanted to argue with, or that didn't resonate, or that you wondered about? Can you share that?
Yeah, I think one thing that gave me just a little bit of pause and wondering, in the section in chapter 5 about enduring relationships, so they introduced the term meno, right, about that abiding relationships. I wondered about the idea of long abiding relationships in the context of teachers. I think they mentioned traveling with students, right, from grade to grade, or colleagues working with one another across the years. And I think in healthy institutions with healthy individuals, I think that would be the asset that the authors describe it as. However, I can't help but think that maybe promoting longevity as a rule could do harm in some situations with unhealthy people, right? And the authors do acknowledge that, like the human frailty part of it. So they say, this is a quote, and again, I don't have a page number, but such mental commitment also permits and expects things to go wrong in our relationships. When we enter into a mental relationship with one another, we do so acknowledging that we will make mistakes, let each other down, and cause one another pain. The choice to abide, regardless of that disappointment, shows grace at the heart of our connection, where we prioritize the relationship over the day-to-day success or failure. Absolutely. Right? And also, I worry for situations that could turn abusive if people in positions of power are spiritually or mentally unhealthy. And so that abiding posture works when there are not outlying issues of abuse of power.
It just comes back to this whole idea of flourishing relationships. It's got to be all parts of this being flourishing then too, right?
And so yes, it should be about abiding relationships. Yeah. But also we have to be aware of the danger of providing cover. Right. Yeah. In a situation that could be harmful for either students or other faculty.
It's in that same part of chapter 5, but a little different context. And the thing I'd like to argue with too. This is in the section on page 81 in my book, Serving Relationships, and they're talking here about the role that educators play as servants, and the relationship, the posture of our relationship is often one of service, right? And just a little bit of it here, they're talking through the story in John chapter 13 of Jesus washing the disciples' feet, and like this is the ultimate model of service, right? That you're going to not be so caught up in the trappings of your own office or role, right? Like clearly the disciples should have been washing Jesus' feet, and instead he's washing theirs. But the bit that kind of caught me was this. I'll read a little bit from page 81 here, right? On one level, the call of the gospel is to clearly imitate and seek opportunities to do the same in all of our relationships, whatever their power structures and hierarchies. Given the sheer volume of work and expectation in our roles, it can seem unthinkable to consider how we could serve someone else today. Yet consistently choosing service can cause ripples of flourishing throughout practical actions that put others first. And this is complicated, right? Because I agree with that sentiment, but I also want to argue with that a little bit, because I think teachers are already primed for service. Like we wouldn't even get into this profession if we weren't thinking of serving.
Like our very jobs are service.
Correct. Yeah. And so I once had a pastor who said we should never be shooting on people. And I always loved that phrase, right? And this, and I understand the context in which Lynn and Andy are offering it, so I want to be very grace-filled toward them in saying it, but it kind of felt like shooting on. Well, you should really sacrifice every person. Well, of course we should, because that's what Christ followers are called to do, not just teachers. Like that's what it means to be a Christ follower. But I just wanted, like in today's school climate and culture, I wondered how that would be received by other teachers. So that's a small quibble, really, in the midst of what I thought was a beautiful piece.
Right, absolutely. And mine is the same. Like they acknowledge.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
Yeah, and I'm also just wondering, like, what that looks like depending on where certain people are at in their life. Like we go through seasons in life as teachers where we have more capacity to serve. Yeah. And there's other times where it's actually we have limited the capacity because of what else is happening in our life, and that to me then comes back to, so what does it mean that we trust each other, that we trust each other as a faculty, right? to say, hey, now is not your time, and how do we actually, maybe there comes a time where we actually release each other sometimes from serving, right?
Yeah.
Is to say, it looks like this, maybe you should take a pass on this, actually, knowing that we embody service all the time, no matter what. Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. One of the lines that I found really interesting, it was actually a really small line. It was, schools practice hospitality when they keep their doors open, literally and metaphorically.
Ooh, yeah.
So I was trying to picture what that looked like in terms of, like, if they meant literally doors open, like unlocked. Like, is that what that, like, or did that mean around admissions, things like that? So I actually just wanted to ask you guys first, before I go further, how do you read that line of schools practice hospitality when they keep their doors open, literally and metaphorically? Do you think they were? Do you read that as around admissions, or do you mean that literally our front doors are going to be unlocked during the day? Because I actually read it both ways, and so I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I don't know unlocked doors, but I think that families are welcome.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Or come visit us.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
That people should be welcome.
Right. I mean, they have to buzz in. Speaking as a parent, I hope my kids' school's doors are not unlocked.
Yeah. In this day and age,
I really do.
We live in,
I would have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But
and that's why. So I've been in schools that have done both, actually. Yeah. So I've been in schools where there was unlocked doors, but so the reason I wanted to, again, I come from a context where I was in a school that had open enrollment, or what some people might call missional enrollment. And we were a school that had a covenantal enrollment policy, and transitioned to open or missional.
So in a nutshell,
covenantal means that, thanks for that. Yeah. I don't want to assume language. Covenantal means that a family that applies to go there must be a member, generally means must be a member of a church, like the family. And open or missional means that you don't necessarily need to be a member of a church. The school is open for everybody. Anybody can go here.
It's a mission field.
Yeah,
too, right?
Totally. Yeah. And one of the reasons, so I want to argue with this, not because I necessarily disagree with it, but I also feel like for schools to be open, there needs to be, in terms of having open enrollment, what are the boundaries around that? Is it literally for everyone? And are schools being clear about that when people enroll there? And what does hospitality look like? What are the expectations? Like, I always think, hey, there's always freedom within the law, for lack of a better word. And so what are the expectations when you come to a faith-based school in terms of what does it mean to partner with this school as parents? Are there any expectations? And to be hospitable, I think, means to those enrolling and those who are already enrolled. Yeah. And so as I read that, I really appreciate the notion of that. But I think there needs just to be a clear description of what that means and what that looks like.
And harder to do in places where it hasn't been the tradition.
Correct.
Totally. Right? And so how does it fit mission and vision? And so if schools are even going to do the work of switching from one to the other,
that's a big process.
That's a big process. And so when I read this, I just felt like, whoa, like that was mentioned. I love the image of the table that they give, all of that. I was cheering that on, literally. But I also felt like, boy, that is hard work. And it's one thing to suggest it. I think I would have liked some more practical, hey, if you're going to go through this process, what might this look like, to give some guidance around that. But I love that in principle. I love the table. Instead of the three-legged stool that many people in some Christian schools have grown up between, the partnership between the church, home, and school. I love that idea of where does the community fit into that. But I just think that is a hard work that needs to be done for schools So I wanted to argue with that a little bit. All right, round 3 is what do you aspire to as an educator? So is there something in here that you thought, yeah, I need to make a note of that, and I want to aspire to be more like that, or to embed that more into my practice. Dave?
I've got this is a short one for me, but,
Okay.
but one that really caught me here. On page 62, so I'm in the chapter 4 on flourishing relationships. This is the quote that caught me. In many schools, the subtext of relational work is transactional, whether conscious or not. For example, positive interactions between leaders and teachers can be viewed as important primarily for efficient school management, while good relationships with families can be seen as a vehicle for reinforcing the work of teachers in the classroom. And that caught me, because I think that if we're serious about flourishing and we're talking about relationships, that means like we need to lead with that flourishing. It can't just be something transactional. And I've said before too, I think there's a difference among colleagues between being congenial and being collegial. Right, and I think that's the same kind of argument here. It just it strikes me again, that reminder, I got to be more than just congenial, more than just being friendly to people around me. If I'm going to be a true colleague, there's a different kind of engagement that you have to have there, and it's more than just that transactional nature.
Right, and mine actually is from the same section.
Oh, yeah.
And it's this: a Christian vision for education does not view outcomes as ends that are justified by relational means. Rather, such a vision flips this narrative by framing the goals of education as entirely relational.
Oh, yeah.
So human relationships are not a means to an impersonal end, but the ends themselves are human, specifically flourishing humans. And so that for me was interesting. It's not that we're using relationships to get to an academic outcome, right? Much like the transactional nature that you were talking about, but the fact that flourishing humans are the goal.
Yeah, right. And that changes the conversation.
Right, it
then,
totally.
Right? Like, if that's the outcome we're actually looking for.
Yeah, and I thought I needed to hear that.
Yeah. Good reminder.
Do you think that's what most parents want?
You're asking an important question, and I think there's probably nuance to that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
I think the short version, most parents would say yes, but I don't know that they mean yes when push comes to shove.
Interesting.
Right? Because I think there's multiple layers.
Yes, but not at the cost of
fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that the reason I ask is that I'm asking that even as I reflect on myself as a parent. So I don't. So that question sounds like you parents who are listening. I'm saying what maybe the better context is that what I want as a parent, and in the end, of course I want my children to flourish.
Right. And I also want them to get
what else?
School.
Totally.
Yeah.
What else? What else do I want? Right. And
this picks up on what we were talking about last week too, right? Like how peculiar do you want to be?
Yeah.
Right? Do we really want peculiar?
Yeah.
Yes, but
do we? Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
If to truly flourish as image bearers of God, might that require us to give something up?
Well, it probably will.
Yeah.
Right?
And are we willing to? And again, I'm asking that of myself, and it's like
the
yes, but
the gospel message is one of being countercultural, though, right? So then, if we're serious about flourishing in a gospel-informed kind of way, does that mean we're going to look peculiar? Are we going to do things differently? Probably.
My aspire comes from page 80, where it just says, if we're going to genuinely pursue flourishing together, we need to first acknowledge our shortcomings, where and whom we have excluded rather than included, and then turn to do the hard work of reconciliation and, where needed, restoration and renewal. It just reminds me, right, that reconciliation begins first by listening and trying to understand, right? Just to having the courage to ask hard questions and then to reflect on them. And so it made me wonder for all of our communities, no matter where where the harm has been done. And I need to think about that in my own life too. Like as I'm sitting here talking, where do I need to seek reconciliation? Where because nobody gets it right all the time. It's one thing to acknowledge that we didn't get it right. It's another step. It takes courage for the sake of their flourishing and even our own to seek people out and say, how could we have done better so that we can do better in the future. Folks, thanks for the good God-delighting work that you're doing in your schools and with students. I want to thank you for joining us in the hallway, and as you go into this week, we just want to send you with this blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Thanks for listening and have a good week, everybody.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening.
I was panicking. I was reading.
Hey, this is relational work too,
Yeah.
after all.
Good.
Sometimes things do fall apart.
Oh, my word.
It's all right.